Okay, this lecture is about some of the theory behind education and management, which you're going to need to know for not just for your boards, but because as a medical technologist, you are going to be in a supervisory position, whether initially or eventually. At the very least, you will be required to educate future um, medical technologists, and you will be in a position where you would have to have some form of management training. There are a couple of things that are favored by the boards. There are different theories about how education, or I should say, theories to apply to education. And there are lots of different theories to apply to management. There are a few that have been sort of cherry-picked by the boards, and we'll go through them so that you at least recognize their names and the background for them. With Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains, this is a theory that was created in 1956 by a psychologist named Dr. Bloom, Dr. Benjamin Bloom. Pardon me. And he was trying to promote higher forms of thinking and education. So prior to 1956, the majority of education, and we go from K all the way through higher education, there was a lot more emphasis on rote memorization, sort of just memorize, do what I did, memorize what I did. And those things work. They definitely got us as far as 1956 at the very least. But in Bloom's theory, there should be, as you progress in education, you need to hit those other factors that will help the learner form more deeply held memories of whatever it is you're trying to teach. So the idea was to emphasize, instead of just watch what I do, then you do it. There was really, in his theory, Bloom wanted to analyze and evaluate concepts, processes, procedures, and principles instead of just remembering facts. Okay, this was really more intended for higher education, where you would try and design mechanisms of instruction or procedures of instruction or learning processes, not necessarily for the basics, of any particular. Okay, and so under Bloom, there were three domains of learning activities that were established, and those were the cognitive, which would be your mental skills and knowledge. So you do have to fulfill the cognitive aspect of any learning. Facts that you want your student to retain. But then you also need to address two other domains of learning that might have been ignored before all this theory came out, and that has to do with the effect or the growth, whatever growth that the student could have as far as their emotional or how do they feel about learning this thing? How does learning this make them feel? Are they smarter? Are they more valuable? Are they a better worker? Those are all things that are addressed in the affective domain of learning. And then you also have to apply the psychomotor domain. So what are the manual or physical skills? So these definitely apply to the laboratory incredibly well. So when you learn any procedure in the laboratory, we can teach you any procedure. But we have to teach you all three aspects of it. So aspect one, what are the facts? What are you trying to do with this procedure? And what's the theory behind it? What is the attitude or the self-motivational thing? Well, why is the procedure valuable? How does this make you a better technologist to be able to perform this? You could spend your whole career doing manual spin hematocrits. You can just fill up capillary tubes, spin them, and read them. That would be sufficient. What is the purpose of teaching you how to do a hematocrit on an instrument? How does that make you a better, more effective, more productive technologist? Those are things that should be included in the learning process. And then finally, the psychomotor domain. Well, what are the physical skills? How do you physically manipulate the materials in front of you in order to fully learn whatever the procedure is in front of you? Bloom created these domains to to apply to any procedure. And well, this was really more of an educational issue, but the idea was that any learning procedure that you wanted to get across to a student, you needed to hit those 3 domains to ensure that they learned, that they weren't just memorizing things. When people just memorize things, they can't troubleshoot as well. They can't follow through, analyze the data from a particular procedure as well. And the idea was that if you're able to hit those 3 domains, you're basically allowing the student to learn at a higher level, a higher order. A student who just memorizes the steps would not be a good technologist in our case as a student who learns not only the steps in the procedure, but why the steps are performed, the different mechanisms are performed, the value of performing those steps over some other steps in a related procedure, and so on down the road. You have to apply all of those domains, and that technologist who learns from within those 3 domains, according to Bloom's theory, is a better technologist. Definitely higher order thinking. Both can get things done, but that doesn't mean that they're of equal value to the profession, to the employer, whatever it is. Okay. And within this learning, whenever we have learning, there has to be some mechanism by which we assess whether or not you've learned the material. And that's a reality. In Bloom's day, in our day, before Bloom's day, we need to not only make sure that you've learned it, but ensure that you maintain that learning, okay, so that it's not a case of where my son learns his 2 times tables and then a week later he forgets them because now he's focused on the 3 times tables. The idea is to remember them throughout. And so, assessment of learning has to be applied, not just to Bloom's theory, to Bloom's techniques, but also to in the laboratory. Assessment is hated. I know you guys don't like tests, but they are a reality. And so you need to know that there are 2 types of assessments. We have criterion referenced assessments or norm referenced assessments. And you have to understand hopefully, which one you are doing at the time that you're doing them. So, for example, designed for a student, whatever the is, and the guide is a fixed set of standards. Okay, so for example, you are given an exam and you are required to perform at a particular grade level. If you assess that, you convert that into the laboratory, you are given, say, the controls to run as an assessment, and those you're expected to perform them, and they should work at a certain, at a predetermined way, as opposed to a norm referenced assessment where you take the results of all the tests given and you throw them at a Gaussian curve, at a bell curve, and you make it's a predetermined form. You want to force the results into for the normalized distribution. Okay, so you have a small percentage of the students performing either very, very well or very, very poorly, and then the majority of students or laboratories will perform average. Okay, to these, but they do apply in the laboratory. So with you a reference material in and are expected to test it as if it's a patient, you know, your state proficiency testing material or CAP proficiency testing material, whichever one. They know what the results are. So if they send you sodium level to perform, they know what the sodium is in there. Okay, and then your results are compared to the known on that. And another assessment that you will have, you get inspectors in, and the inspectors look for, say, deficiencies, or they look more frequently, they look at the procedures that you use, and those procedures and their are compared to the same procedures as they're performed in other hospitals. And if you're getting results that are similar to those, not all the way, not too far out of the norm, then they're considered past inspection in that case. That's usually addressed to procedures that you have. So, for example, they might come in and look at the way that you clean your garbage, make sure that you have, how many incidents of contamination do you end up with things. They'll look at those issues. You have really poor contamination rates, really good contamination rates. As long as you fit at least average, then you should be fine if your procedure performs the way it's supposed to. And most of your, that's why we have to document our QC. They'll look at our QC. Is our QC functioning the way the procedure states that it should, and the way that the procedure, which will be performed by any number of hospitals, the way they're performed, the way theirs is performing. And that might be a norm referenced assessment that affects the laboratory on any given day. Okay, so knowing which assessment, you certainly don't want to think you're going through a normed reference assessment and figure out that there's a given, we have to reach this benchmark, because that is you need to know what the benchmark is. Similarly, managers used to be just the person who's been there the longest, or the person who was, I don't know, related to the president, or whatever the means were. Their management was just something that maybe the person who was there the longest always did. But theories about managing actually have developed over the past years, and making sure that you understand there's more that you want them to do things. You actually have to have a reason behind. Pardon. As well as a way to assess if they actually did it. So there's actually a lot more to managing than just getting the cool office in the corner and controlling the schedule and always getting weekends off, something like that. So J-Code has decided what the main duties of any manager should be. Okay, and these managing at one hospital is not going to be the same. At Sloan Kettering, you guys have a lot of layers of management. You have managers and supervisors and lead techs and all that stuff. Lots of different levels. And you might distribute these duties amongst them. If you go to a small country hospital, there might literally just be one manager, okay, one supervisor for each department. You do have to have one for each department. It is a minimum requirement for however, that might literally be the only person in that department. So you might be the manager because you're the only person standing. And so then the duties can become all yours. So then according to JCAHO, the duties are that planning, which would be formulating any goals or objectives, as well as organizing the tasks on that plan, as well as schedules for that. So if you're planning some kind of QC checkpoint, then you need to the tasks that will be involved in that, as well as plan the schedule. When are those tasks due? Who's going to do them, and when are the tasks due? You also have to organize. Organization is probably one of the biggest things for managers. You guys have all had managers. You know that some managers are really very well organized and others just awful. So they're hopefully on the continuum, really very well organized and awful. You guys would land closer to the very well organized. But an organized manager would be establishing effective communication with all of their employees, as well as guiding the relationships that exist within the department. And that would include making sure that a job description is well defined for each member of the department. Training has occurred for each member of the department according to that job description. And that, again, communication and relationships continue to the point where the employee always knows what they're supposed to accomplish, and that the feedback is there to know whether they accomplished it and if they did a good job at it. The only communication with your manager should not be at the end of the year in your annual assessment. Then directing. I'm sure, well, if you haven't, I'm sure you've had managers before who, maybe it's even only in an email. You get a message, this is what you have to do. And then a manager is a good director, have oversight of all the different steps and stages in any plan, that they did, the first step, okay? So how are you doing with that plan? Are you on track to finish it on time? And they are a sounding board, for resources and for direction. I have these steps done, but I don't really know how to get on to the next step. All of that stuff is part of the directing portion of the duties of any manager. And finally, controlling. So a manager is supposed to be able to control all aspects of what's going on in their department. That doesn't mean that they're controlling people directly. It means resources, utilization, supply and demand, outcomes, costs, as well as procedures and processes that are occurring, making sure that they're controlling that everybody's on the same page and everybody's moving in the same direction. At the same time, they should also be on top of the process of improving quality within the laboratory. The laboratory shouldn't be content to stay where they are. The laboratory should always be moving on to the next better, more applicable procedure that's coming through the pipeline. So how does a manager do that? Well, there's a few, again, for as many managers as there are management theories to apply to them. Management theory just is a mechanism of saying, well, how am I going to get any one of those duties done? What style? Okay, so there's a couple that the boards have put through, and things that you should. This is by no means a management course, okay? These are just the theories that are favored by CAP, by the boards at this point, and we'll move on from them. They do apply pretty well to the laboratory. That there's not a lot of imaginative thinking. Really not imaginative in the sense that if you have a procedure, that's the one that you have to do. Imagination comes with developing new procedures. That's different from performing the procedures that are in place. You're not allowed to decide that there's a better way to do this and just insist upon it on your own. You can only suggest it to your supervisor that maybe this would be a better way to go. But there are a couple of assumptions of management theory that are kind of cynical assumptions. And the first assumption is that workers work hard enough not to get fired. The idea being, and there are some who definitely do that, but there are most workers that I've worked with who work as they need to work. They're proud of the work that they're doing, and they want to do it correctly. And so work for them really sort of a given, okay? So it's a cynical assumption, but so is assumption two, that the owners, management, will only pay enough for workers not to quit. So there's this, the real assumption, and there's really only one, is that workers and supervisors or managers really are always at cross purposes. And while it is cynical, unfortunately, it is frequently true. You cannot hire more workers and pay your workers more if you do not have production that provides the revenue for the workers. And at the same time, you cannot produce those revenues if you do not have the motivated work staff to do so. So the balance between those two, I'm only going to work as hard as I have to, and I'm only going to pay as little as I have to. That balance has to be, the reality is if you pay too much for not enough quality, then why should I? So there are definitely these two cynical assumptions that exist, and the reason they exist is because behind both sides of them. Okay, so a couple of theories, management theories, that exist are, for example, which is to apply, it's a style, I should say, a style to apply to the type of management that exists in a particular organization. In the theory management style, we're talking about a very authoritarian style. The emphasis is on productivity, where you have, we want a fair day's work, and we don't want to restrict output. We will reward performance, but the underlying belief with this authoritarian style, this Theory X style, is that management, the purpose of management is to counteract the tendency for workers to avoid work. That they see that is an inherent tendency. Workers don't want to really work, and so it's management's job to sort of crack the whip and keep them moving. This theory is, you can see here, where management has to continue pressure on the staff in order to get any output on the staff. Okay, and so you see that you're at cross purposes, hence the X through the center. You're always at cross purposes with your staff. Okay, and what Theory X assumes about the individual, about the workers, is that they're always trying to avoid work. They're constantly in need of prodding and pushing, and that they'll always have some kind of excuse if they fail to get things done. And so the Theory X manager has to constantly be on them, constantly. Okay, the Theory Y management style assumes, however, the opposite of that, that workers, they work because they really like to work. They want to satisfy their need for achievement, that they require work for self-respect, and that people will the theory why manager or that institution will be much more like sort of a participant style. So it will assume they're going to be able to direct themselves, going to have self-control, that they're going to be committed to the objectives of the institution, and the management really is only to maximize that commitment. That's their only job. One of the problems with the theory Y issue is that while theory X, if the theory X answer is always, they never want to reach the goal. With theory Y, if the staff neither extreme of the interpretation would never be a perfect fit for hopefully for any one individual management style. So at some point along the continuum, the management, and by management I'm talking about the administration of the hospital, constantly, prodding and keep it going and get to work, maybe announcements over it's 12 o'clock, take a half an hour lunch and then get back to your desk, to the theory Y with, throw away the punch clocks and don't worry about the schedule. People will show up when they need to, and you guys can all figure it out yourselves. That there might be some place along that continuum that might be more accurate, okay, or more effective overall in the laboratory. Then we have another management style. It's called management by objective, or management by result. In this particular theory, the principle is that the employee should have a clear understanding of their role as responsibilities, so then they can potentially understand the activities they would have to perform and how they relate to their achievement in the entire institution. Okay, so you give the employee their job description. You give them a mission statement for the section, the laboratory, we'll say, in this case, and you help them to understand how their job description fulfills that mission statement. Okay, the importance in the management by objective theory is that we want to help the employee fulfill their own personal goals, their goals as an employee. Okay, so that motivation, which would mean in management by objective theory, motivation would have to include the employee to help the employee set up the goals. If you were a theory X institution, the motivation would be get it done or you're fired. In the theory Y institution, the motivation would be, don't you just want to achieve the objective? There really wouldn't be a need for motivation because all staff are self-motivated. That's the belief. But in the management by objective, or MBO principles, the theory, you have to help the employee develop their goals, develop the goals based on what will motivate that employee. Okay, and that overall will help increase job satisfaction as well as commitment. Management by objective requires an awful lot of communication as well as coordination. Theory does require communication because you got to keep that whip cracking. Theory Y, it doesn't really require anything because the staff just does what they want to do anyway. So everybody gets the stuff done based on what they want to do on that particular day. So again, you have to, management by objective is kind of riding the line between these two, somewhere in between the continuum of either end of the XY theory. The management by objective would require frequent communication, coordination, lots of reviews, lots of interaction with the supervisor. So if you never see your supervisor, they're not following management by objective. Okay, if you should be talking to them more often. And there has to be, and that's where JCO talks about there has to be a written job description, one that you signed off on when you took the job. That's required by JCO. Okay, and what happens then with an employee who has other objectives, they tend to achieve them more, surprisingly. The more communication, those objectives, they are to reach those objectives, whatever. Okay, and then those objectives can be fitted into the higher up, into the whole organization. So what other objectives do we want to hit? Well, we need to hire people who are willing to and capable of fulfilling those objectives. And overall, you basically get a unified, at least according to the theory, theoretically, you get a unified organization, all working to achieve goals. They might not be the same goals, but the overall overarching goal is more likely to be achieved. There's been a mnemonic applied to the management by objective theory, and it's called SMART. The people make the mnemonics and then fill them in the previous, I think. And it's this mnemonic is associated with the process of setting those objectives in the theory of management by objective. So it says that the SMART mnemonic says that objectives should be specific, there's your S, measurable, agreed, realistic, and time-bound. So in other words, you can't define the objectives without the agreement of the person who's supposed to fulfill it. Okay, and there has to be some kind of time, or a month, whatever it is. Okay, and the theory behind this mnemonic is that what gets measured gets done. Okay, so by measurable, we can't say, oh, well, somebody, the objective for Joe Schmo, who works in the hematology department, is, to create a more unified atmosphere in hematology. That's not really measurable. How are you going to measure unification of the employees? However, something you can measure is less sick days. You can measure less complaints, less incidents. You can measure less reports to HR, whatever the issue is. Those are measurable results. And so if you give Joe Schmo, if the objective is to create a more unified hematology department, then how are you going to measure it? The measurable thing is I want to see a reduced number of complaints to HR in the next 6 months, whatever it is. Okay. Again, there's a lot of for motivation as there are employees, but some of them have something in common, and that there should be more thought behind the process of managing than just being, it can't be your mother's form of management. You do it because I said so. That doesn't really work when you're paying somebody. well, it might work in the short run, but the reality is that if you want to keep that person, you need to fulfill a few other factors when it comes to motivation. And although those two theories are similar, there's some slight differences that we'll go through here. You have Herzberg's motivation/hygiene theory, otherwise known as the dual factor theory. And this one states that there are certain factors in the workplace that will allow an employee to feel, and a whole nother set of factors that will cause an employee to feel job dissatisfaction. And Herzberg analyzed a whole bunch of interviews that he had with employees, and he found that there were characteristics of the job about that have the capacity to either gratify the employee, making him happy. It has to do with achievement of relation. And then the absence of those same factors, it doesn't necessarily lead to unhappiness and dissatisfaction. So you think, okay, well, if I get paid a lot, then I'm going to be happy. But if I'm not paid a lot, does that mean I'm definitely not happy? So do I have to make $100,000 a year in order to be happy? Or can I be happy in a job where I'm only making $50,000 a year? What Herzberg found is that not having the $100,000 doesn't necessarily mean that you're unhappy in your job. Okay? The dissatisfaction in the job actually came from other factors. Concrete. So it wasn't the absence of certain things, it was the presence of other job characteristics. Okay? The chart here, you can see the dissatisfiers that exist, working conditions, policies, salary and benefits, supervision, status, security, the co-workers, and personal life. All of these things can lead to dissatisfaction in the job. And the same thing, characteristics that are motivators in the job: recognition, achievement, advancement, growth, responsibility, and job challenge. All of these can be motivators for or lead to happiness in a job. So what Herzberg was saying is that you should increase the motivators in any particular job description, and at the same time decrease the dissatisfying factors, characteristics of any particular job, and you would develop an employee who would be more useful to the institution. Okay, so and now this is not necessarily 100% across the board the same for everything. You know, for just looking here at this list, working conditions, for example, it may be the case that working conditions, for example, a part-time job. One person might be very dissatisfied with a part-time job, but another person, it might fit perfectly into their life, and that's something that might depend on their personal life going on. So while just got out of school and just out of college and I have lots of bills to pay and I can only find a part-time job, I might be very dissatisfied with the job that I have because I'm really looking for a full-time job. If, however, I just had a baby and I've got another toddler at home, maybe I would prefer a part-time job. Setting up the expectations for the position in advance and knowing the type of employee that you're looking for. If you have if you're looking at two employees, one is looking for a full-time job, you only have a part-time job to offer. It might be better to find one who is looking for keeping when you're interviewing and going through, well, which employee do I think would work the best for the needs institution? So Herzberg's motivation hygiene theory is very sensible, obviously. You have to set up the new expectations for each individual job description for each job you need to fill. That's probably true in any case. I instead any job theory job description. Maslow is needs of the employee in order. Highlights those needs in order of importance from what he's decided. So first off, the most important thing, and you can see that it's at the bottom of the chart, would be the physiological needs. Your employee needs to eat, they need to pay for their house, they need to have clothes on their back, they need all of those things. Those are physiological needs, and those are very important, most important. They provide the base of the pyramid. Then, of course, safety. Again, I have to feel secure in my shelter and in my employment. I don't want to feel like I'm going to lose this job tomorrow, because then I might lose my house and my family, my car, anything else. So that those two form the basis of how secure I feel, how much I like my job. Does it fulfill my physiological needs, and do I feel safe and secure in the job? Then he goes to the belonging needs, where the employee looks for these characteristics in a job that will make them feel more fulfilled and more safe in the positions they choose. So belonging, do they feel part of a group? Do they have, does this job allow them to feel accepted? Okay, so does it motivate you to feel like you're fulfilling what you've worked for? Okay. And then esteem, do you feel good about the job? Does it make you feel good to have the job? Is involved? Is some achievement? And finally, self-action. Does this job allow you to grow and develop emotionally, intellectually, all of those things? Does that allow me to become a better, in our case, laboratory, if I take this job? All of these things together will be prioritized by any individual employee, and the employer who's looking for you needs to make sure that what you're offering can hit these notches. Again, more on motivation. Adler's ERG is another theory. The ERG theory refers to existence, relatedness, and growth needs. Again, you're just prioritizing the needs of any individual employee. In Adler's theory, he compressed Maslow's hierarchy of needs from 5 needs. The existence needs are basically the physiologic and biologic needs, and there's the needs, meaning how does this job allow me to relate to other people? Does it make me feel, same thing as with Maslow saying, but instead of 5 needs, you get 3. And then realization development, that's the growth. And you can see in the pyramid, you can see it's still the same. Physiologic, the existence, the things that lead to your existence, those things make up the base of the pyramid. And when you're talking about self-actualization, those things make up the tip of the pyramid. And Simon Hertman's list of needs. These are all, people got their PhDs doing this. God bless them. Okay, with their Hertman's, he's actually expanded it. So from only 5 needs, he's expanded it to 4 needs. And what Hertman said was that there are 4 survival needs, and when those 4 survival needs are met, and those would be your physical well-being, mental well-being, then a safe and healthy environment, and some kind of either reproduction or limiting reproduction, one of those other things, one or the other of those things. So your survival and the survival of the species. When those 4 needs are met, any human will attempt to satisfy the next 4 needs, which Hertman defines as respect from others as well as self-esteem, which will lead to happiness, and then appreciation of what you do for a living, as well as being able to do good for others. This contentment is what Hertman calls it. And so what Hertman says is that the first 4 have to be met. And when they are met, an employee will desire to meet the next 4. Okay? And it's not until you satisfy the last 2, being able to appreciate what you have and doing good for others, that the employee would feel content overall. So if you want to, you could pick another shape and get your own PhD. McClelland, God bless him, didn't pick a shape. So McClelland's human motivation theory was a little bit different, only in that it doesn't have a shape. But if you look at the way he's broken it down, he's applied particular needs or desires with 3 different or 3 broad domains. You have a domain of achievement, a domain of affiliation, and a domain of power. And so in the domain of achievement, an employee will want to be able to set and accomplish goals, take risks, and receive feedback. In the domain of affiliation, the employee wants to belong to something, wants to develop friends, and the feedback that they receive should affirm the trust involved with making. You can't belong anywhere or have friends if there's no trust involved. And so feedback is required to affirm that trust. And then finally, in the domain of power, the employee wants to control something, even if it's just themselves. You want to have power over your own destiny, kind of. So the need to control is then followed by the need to win. So I want to do better. And finally, what's the feedback? The feedback should be for more opportunities to increase my control, to increase my winning. Okay, so pardon me. In each of the domains in McClelland's motivation theory, the employee is looking to fulfill the minimum, either setting goals, belonging, and controlling, and then building upon that. Okay, I've set my goals. Now I want to take some risks. So setting new goals, harder goals. I belong to something, but now I want to make friends within that affiliation. That's a little different than just belonging. And in power, I control at least myself. Now I want to control more than myself, and that makes me a winner. Okay, and there's feedback required in each of these domains. You need to provide feedback that allows the employee to know if they are accomplishing those goals, that they do belong, and are there more opportunities for them to gain more control. And in McClelland's motivational theory, the job of the manager is to provide that feedback in each of these 3 domains in order to keep the employee motivated and continually improving in the institution. Finally, continuous quality improvement, which basically have no place else to put, but it is required in management. CQI these are things that come up within JCAHO that have to be applied to the laboratory on a fairly regular basis. CQI is a process-based, data-driven approach to improving quality the quality of any product or service, okay? It requires, or I should say it operates under the belief that you always have room for improvement, okay? There's always some kind of area, some process, some operation, some activity that could use an increase in quality, okay? CQI is a perspective process, so you constantly have to, oh, pardon me. It's a constantly moving process. So there's always something where you're looking for areas where improvement can occur. You're planning to do, evidence-based processes that allow you to plan for improvement in that area. You after evidence-based, you actually improve the area, check and see if that worked, and continually move around that. Okay. The focus here on CQI should always be customer needs, and this is required in JCAHO and CMS. The constant receipt of consumer, in our case, patient satisfaction surveys allows us to determine which areas we can improve on. We really do require the patients to fill out those surveys because actually we don't get paid if they aren't satisfied. So CMS wants to see that our patient satisfaction levels are consistently high and constantly moving higher. And so that requires that we continually look to find new areas where improvement can occur. It can be something as simple as, okay, the patients who came off of, out of the dialysis unit, they really hate the color of the walls. Well, can we change the color of the walls? Will it be cost effective and allow the patients to feel more comfortable? Okay, then this is a constant. Let's try that and then see, do you like the color of our new walls? And you go through. This is not a blame seeking kind of situation. The hospital has to take positive action, but that doesn't mean, it's not like, the patients hated the new color that you put on the walls, you're fired, we need somebody else. That's not. If you use evidence-based data and you look at what wall color will most please patients, and do some kind of study or something like that, and then change the wall color and see if the patients like it. These are the steps that you're supposed to take. Require an awful lot of trust, an awful lot of respect, so that you get the data. You have to trust your patients that they'll tell the truth. You have to trust that they'll give you true answers, and not want to be, sort of just about it. And it requires an awful lot of communication. But it also puts responsibility on the staff. We actually we can't sit on our laurels. We're not allowed. We constantly have to look for areas where it'll improve. And in some cases, it might be, maybe you're only capable of accomplishing an improvement in something simple at this point. Maybe the only thing that you really feel you can do today is improve the, flow of information between the techs in your department. In a hospital that I worked, all of our communication was done with little Post-it notes. Post-it notes fall off the wall and get swept up by the evening janitors. So maybe that's not the best way to do it. Looking for new ways to do everything that we do in the laboratory is what CQI is talking about. And the reason it's continuous quality is you're constantly looking at where can the improvement occur, what's our plan, do we perform it, and check, did it work, did it improve things? Those are all things that have to occur.